The questions we ask are important. They can open up conversation. And also, a question can shut a conversation or a relationship down. And as we are focused this Lent on seeking and asking questions, let's consider some of the questions and assumptions that are in today's text. Our main question that gets the action started is in the second verse, and it's from the goofy disciples. And they're walking along and they just blurt out, "Rabbi, who sinned?" Right off the bat, this question sets up a whole confrontation between lots of characters, and it assumes ableism. And that is, it is harmful and ableist to assume that blindness is an inherent deficiency. And at some level, we probably would all agree with that statement, at least in theory. And yet, that assumption is baked into our culture. This story is 2,000 years old, and it's had an impact, and it felt like it's a story that could be told today. To quote Reverend Bruce Race Chow, who helped create our Lenten theme from A Sanctified Art, he says that metaphors using blindness are built on the idea that this physical state of being is somehow less than, and regardless of the cause, is in all cases a problem, a malady, an affliction that must be solved, healed, and fixed. The culture of Jesus' time did not think any differently. Thus, the many examples of physical limitation are being the stand-in for sin and brokenness. The disciples ask, "Who sinned?" And that question makes a whole lot of these assumptions that I would like us to not make these days, because we know better. We know that blindness does not have a cause and effect nature. It doesn't have a cause and effect nature. It is not moral. It might have a scientific or a genetic or component, or it might not. But it's not a cause and effect. So perhaps we should ask a different question. Who doesn't sin? And that question assumes the answer to this other question, which is even more basic, which is, what is sin? And that's a conversation for this congregation to have, because I bet we have a bunch of different ideas of what that word means and how we feel about that word, because it's pretty loaded. In this case, in this text, the word for sin literally means to miss the mark. It implies the man born blind is separated from God and from the community. He is, right? He is separated from this community, but was that by his choice? Was it his fault? This definition of sin is somewhat ironic to me, given that the people who use this word are the ones who are doing the pushing and the distancing and the separating. And those people are pushing and distancing and separating not just from him, but also from Jesus. And they, in their separating and distancing and trying to find some sort of, comfort in their discomfort, they keep asking questions, and boy, I wish they would just shut their mouths. Because first it's the townspeople, and his own neighbors don't recognize him or don't want to. Is this not the person who used to beg? How can this be? The religious leaders are no better. Look, a miraculous thing has occurred, and they respond with disgust that it happened on the Sabbath. How can God do good things on any day God wants to? It's so confusing. And then they turn their attention to these poor parents who are just as surprised as anyone else, and they put them in a bind. Is this your son? How is it that he now sees? As if they have any idea. And after interrogating the parents, They get nowhere, and so they decide to interrogate the man himself, who also has no idea, and as we heard beautifully, just keeps repeating his story. So I ask you, church, who sinned? And Jesus hears the news about all that has happened and all of the questions and all of the harassment and all of the bullying. And he circles back to this man. And they share a moment of recognition by sound and by sight and by recognizing God and the actions performed and the compassion that is offered. And now this man has been doubly blessed. The religious leaders cannot get out of their own assumptions and the boxes that they have drawn around who's in and who's out, what is sin, what is good, what is bad. They are caught in a fixed mindset. Good, bad, sight, blind, blaming, shaming, cause, effect. And they are so anxious and so in need to control that they cannot ask questions about this amazing thing that has happened that is literally looking at them in the face. And I think we hear people do these same things in our world. I think we probably stumble into such thinking from time to time ourselves without even realizing it. And I wonder what that sounds like when you realize that you may be missing the bigger picture. I would suggest that it probably starts with assuming that you know the boxes, you have your assumptions, and you know how this is going to work. So it may sound like we know. We know people are poor because, or we know people are incarcerated because, or we know people are without homes because, which means they just need X and Y and Z, and they could be happy again. The thing is, of course, we might have a good guess based on statistics or social or psychological or, put it out there. We might have an idea of why this thing is happening. But we don't really know someone's story until we stop and ask and listen. We don't really know. And we can't really know until we ask and humbly ask to start a relationship. Until we ask curious questions. Until we get out of our assumptions and our big brains and just say, tell me about what this is like for you. Those questions, the questions that build those relationships, are ones that, that invite us towards one another and towards our shared humanity. So rather than ask whose fault is it, what might we ask to try to bring healing and help? Could our questions bring someone back into relationship and back into their human dignity? So I wonder what questions we might ask if we were people in this story and we just see this man who is having a weird day, to say the least. How about, do you know your way home? How do you feel? What do you need to be successful? What other questions might we ask? And this is where I'm going to invite some participation. What would you like to know? What are you going to do now with this gift of sight? What do you see?
Is there anything I can do to help you?
Is there anything I can do to help you? Mm-hmm.
Do you need help finding a job?
Do you need help finding a job? Mm-hmm. What else?
Want to see what you look like?
Do you want to see what you look like? Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
What do you want to look for?
Say again?
What do you want to look for?
What do you want to look for? I wonder, is seeing all it's cracked up to be? I don't know. I take it for granted.
How am I going to decide, and how do I feel about decide what am I going to eat tonight for dinner?
Yeah. Well, what is the first thing you want to see on your plate as you eat it? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are so many ways where the questions could invite relationship, right? So may we follow in that path. The path of asking questions with compassion and with curiosity and with love, to show up again and again and again, to be in relationship with others. So may it be.